As I mentioned at the end of the previous video, it's great to do these walkthroughs because you get to see exactly how the root bridge election is carried out. Because the thing is, when we go to either our lab switches or our production network switches, the root bridge election has already taken place. So we miss a lot of that. Now what we do want to see though is how we can double check and triple check sometimes which switch is actually the root for a given VLAN after the root bridge election has taken place. We also need to be able to identify the non-root bridges. It's a really good idea to be able to identify either. Now to see the bid of the local switch and the root switch for a particular VLAN, you just need one command, show spanning tree VLAN. Now each VLAN is going to have its own root switch, and we're not going to concern ourselves with extra VLANs right now, but we are going to a little bit later. Now let's go down to switch 1, and we'll just check that one first. If you run show spanning by itself, by the way, it's going to give you information on every single VLAN on the switch. You might want that, then again you might not want it, so a really good idea is just to add that VLAN 1 at the end. Now we're on switch 1, and I did check the trunks before we started the lab, so switches are communicating, everything's fine there. There are 4 indicators, 4 tip-offs if you will, that we are on the root bridge for VLAN 1. One of them is extraordinarily obvious, the other 3 not so much. The extraordinarily obvious one is this bridge is the root. Ta-da! You know, and you look at that and you say, well Chris, if I have that one, I really don't need the other 3. I think you do actually. It might come up on the exam, and the thing is this shows that you know everything that's going on right now with our election results and with our switches. Now, the first thing here is, why do we have a root ID field and a bridge ID field? Because it looks to me like the values are all the same. You know, here's a priority, and we're using the system ID extension, so what it is 32768 plus the VLAN number. So that's the default default priority for VLAN 1 is therefore 32769. It's 32768 plus 1, and it even mentions that right here when you've got the system ID extension rolling. Now, if I have a priority here, and I have an address here all under root, and I have a hello time under the root, and I have a max age under the root, and I have a forward delay under the root, what's going on with the bridge ID information that looks almost exactly the same, or is in this case exactly the same as far as those values go? Well, the root ID is always going to be the ID information for the root bridge, whether you're on it or not. This is the great thing. You can go to a non-root switch for VLAN 1, run this command, and you can see the priority and the address and the timers for the root bridge, whoever that happens to be. The bridge ID field information is always going to be the information about the local switch. So that's why you have 2 fields here that look a lot alike. The root ID is for your root bridge, the bridge ID is for the local device. Now, besides this bridge as the root, what are the other 3 tip-offs that were actually on the root? The first is that the MAC address listed under root ID and bridge ID are exactly the same. Exactly the same. That means that you are indeed on the root. The other 2 tip-offs come in down here under the interface information. It sounds odd at first when you say root bridges don't have root ports. Because when I first heard that years ago, I thought, well, it seems to me if any switch has root ports, it's the root switch. Well, the root ports are used by non-roots to indicate, hey, here's the port we're going to use when we need to forward something to the root. And not to get all zen on you, or maybe just for a moment, the root bridge or root switch doesn't need to find itself. It already knows where it is. So you're not going to find root ports on a root bridge. What you will find are designated ports, DESG. And your designated ports, the 4th tip-off, they'll all be in forwarding mode. You will not see blocked designated ports on the root. So again, quick review before we head over to the other switch. You'll see this bridge is the root. You'll see the MAC address, the same under the root and bridge ID fields. You'll see all of the ports on the root listed as designated, and then you will see all of those designated ports in forwarding mode. So those are the 4 tip-offs that you're on the root. Therefore, by the process of elimination, we must be on the non-root when we go over to switch 2. Makes perfect sense. Now we have 4 tip-offs here that were not on the route, and one of them is related to this bridge is the route. You don't see that phrase here under route ID. So therefore, right then and there, you know you're not on the route. There's nothing there. It's not going to explicitly say, "Dear Chris, you are not on the route." But the absence of that phrase tells me and tells you that we're not there. So what are the other 3? The other 3 are, first off, the MAC address under route ID and bridge ID are different. Because we know this route ID MAC address, this is the MAC address of the route switch itself. The bridge ID address is the MAC address of the local switch, the one you're actually on. The timers really don't come into play here, but what does are these roles. And where we saw DESG and DESG on the route, on your non-route, what you'll have is one route port and the others are going to be listed as alternate ports. So you do have route ports on your non-route switches. Your route port will be in forwarding mode, but your alternate ports will be in blocking mode. So when you see a port in blocking mode in a situation like this, you know you're on the route right away. So let's step away from that for a moment, because I want to share another illustration with you, because this threw me a little bit the first time I saw it. With spanning tree protocol, we know the deal, we know the deal that STP prevents switching loops. We got that. It's going to put some ports into blocking mode, because in the end, STP only wants to allow one path between point A and point B. And in this case, that happens to be our 2 switches. It's going to disallow the other paths, put them into backup mode, if you will, by putting the minimum number of ports necessary into blocking mode. Now in our 2-switch network, one path between the switches is open, but the other is closed, which we expect, but only one of the ports is in blocking mode, rather than the 2 you might expect. Don't fall for this on the exam. Or a job interview or anywhere else you see it. I think that one might rear its ugly head, because it's really easy to think, oh, well, it's going to put all the ports on the path we're not using into blocking mode. No, it does not. STP is going to put the minimum number of ports into blocking mode, and what that does, it actually speeds up the process of bringing a new path up when the currently open one is down. Because I have a feeling we just might see that good path go down in a future video very, very soon. And when that happens, we want that blocked path to open as quickly as possible, and it will be a little quicker if one of the ports on there is already in forwarding mode. The fewer ports that need to reopen, the faster that new path will now be available. Now, of course, this, it's networking, so when we learn one thing, it brings up other questions. And the other question is, at this point, why did the switches pick that particular path? Why are the ports on fast Ethernet 12 both open on the switches, or 11, but the other path is blocked? How did it choose which port to open and which port to block? We're going to talk about in the very next video when we go over route port selection, path costs, and route path costs. So I'll see you there with another lab.